Hello, everybody. It's Stephen and Walter here for another episode of So Chatty. It's episode number 175, and it's February the 21st, 2025. And so we are continuing our series on In the Hoop bag making. But before we get into this week's part of the process, some things to show you. So this is what I've been working on. You saw this earlier. No, you did not see this earlier in the week because I did not have it done earlier in the week. I finished it Wednesday morning. Where's my picture? Here we go. So there it is, the redone Cornered Stars quilt, which is my pattern. And if you remember, I got it all finished as far as the top was concerned and realized that I had one little piece of these stars in each corner. So there's 3 per corner. I had one little piece turned the wrong way. It looked like sailboats. I had thought about taking it apart, but as I said on Idiot Quilter earlier this week, that would have involved, well, as much time to take it apart and reassemble it as it would to remake the whole quilt. So I remade the whole quilt. And I didn't have enough fabric for the color scheme that I was using with the stars in the first one, so I picked a different color scheme from my stash, and I quite like the color scheme I picked because now you can see the secondary pattern a little bit more clearly with it. My backing fabric, and I didn't take a picture of it, but it is actually fabric that came from GE Designs, and it was in a lovely gift that one of my subscribers and friends, Julie, and many of you know Julie because she's on every Wednesday on our Sewing with Stephanie and Stephen Day. She gave us a box of fabrics from GE Designs, and there was some wide back in there, and this was one of the wide backs. And I used it, and I used it as the binding as well, which I think actually goes very nice with the rest of the quilt. Thoughts?
No, it looks really good.
Okay, high praise. Right there.
And I can't see any mistakes.
Because there aren't any. And I used a very simple quilting design, just these swirls with it. If I was to redo the quilting on this, which I'm not going to do, I would have made those maybe a tiny bit smaller. I used the default that the program figured out from the size of the quilt, but I don't know. But then again, maybe not.
I don't know. I think smaller might have made it too busy, like with the quilting.
Well, that's what I was afraid of. So I let the computer make the decision. Let AI control your life. Yeah. So I've done that. And yesterday, well, not yesterday, on Wednesday for the sew day, I decided I'm so in that in-between projects kind of stage. And I just haven't been feeling like going back to some of my projects that I should be doing, like the Barnstar Sampler. You know that one. I've had that for 2 years. Although earlier today I started working on it again. I don't know how long I'll keep up with that. But in between, I decided to do this. This is by Creative Kiwi, the sewing machine. It's a wall hanging. And the thing about this particular pattern is you see these joins, you do it in pieces, but as you're going through the pattern, the files, you actually join the pieces in the hoop. That's probably something we should look at maybe down the road to show people, because instead of what the bag we're working on in the last wall hanging we worked on, you did the pieces and then you used your sewing machine to join them together. This you don't. They are actually joined in the hoop. It is a bit tricky, but once you've done it once, you kind of get it figured out. And I kind of like doing it that way because then, you know, I'm using one machine. Everything is done. When you're finished the project, you're finished the project. It isn't out like a bag or something or a wall hanging where you have to, you know, sew all these pieces together again. So yeah, maybe down the road we'll do a project that involves this kind of thing. And I like the nice little touch here of a piece of lace. That's what they suggested, or fabric. I went through my ribbon drawer and all I had was this cheap old it's not even really lace. It's just string, more or less. Probably got it at the dollar store. And it's a little 1/2-inch piece. Well, I zigzagged 4 pieces of them together for this project to make a piece big enough with it. And actually, that turned out okay because you can't even see the zigzag stitches in it. So yeah, and then they have this little thread that you put through here. Now, I'll let you know a little secret. You probably didn't notice it right off the bat, but I didn't think about making the spool of thread on top of the machine the same color as the string or the thread coming from the spool of thread. If you notice, I have a magic spool of thread. It's yellow, but it produces purple thread. So yeah, but it was already sewn into it by the time you got to that point of it, and I wasn't changing it.
Why don't you just use? Oh, you've already used the purple thread, right?
Yeah. What do you mean used it?
Oh, you can't change that
No.
color. Oh.
Well, you could, but you'd have to kind of glue in. No, because it's actually, you take it and it is embedded in the embroidery with it. And you put this fairly early in the process. And when
not only that, you'd think that you would make it the same color as your project as well.
What?
That.
What? The lace?
The lace is white.
Oh, I never thought of that.
You've got purple thread and a yellow spool.
Well, it's fantasy anyways. It's not a real sewing machine, Walter. Yeah. You don't realize it's not a real sewing machine. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's not worth redoing it. I actually thought after I realized I had stitched this all out, and then I thought, oh shoot, I should have made it purple. And I probably could have at that stage. I would have just sewn over the top of it because you can do that. We've told you about that before. But at that point I thought, yeah, I don't care that much. So it's fine. It'll do. It's just, I don't know where I'm going to put it. It's actually a fairly good size. I made the
probably most people wouldn't even notice.
No, well, you didn't.
Well, no, I pointed it out. Pointed out,
yeah. Yeah, whatever. But anyways, that's what I've been, what I decided as a palette cleanser, as I call it, to get back into doing quilts. Okay, so Walter has been working on a shirt, but he doesn't have anything to show us. Why is that, Walter?
Because I've been busy doing other things.
Oh, what were those other things you'd be doing?
Like shoveling snow.
Oh, well, yeah, he lives for the snowstorms. He spends 5 hours of the day outside making everything pristine.
Well, no, it's not just that. Earlier this week, last week, it was because a neighbor was on vacation. I was doing his driveway too. So.
And then you did 3 other neighbors as well.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they all see you come and go, ooh, get Walter to do it. He likes
no. Yeah, because our snowblower is bigger than most of it. Other people's snowblowers.
Now he's bragging. Walter's got a big snowblower.
Ooh. Well, people, when they get a snowblower, think when they buy one, they think, oh, well, it takes up too much room at the house, so they buy a small one, right? And the thing is that they work fine 90% of the time, but we have these snowplows that come and leave a huge amount of snow at the end of your driveway, and it's usually pretty compacted, and small snowblowers can't get through it. So, and
usually the snowplow operators have it timed so they know when you finish doing your driveway, and then they come by and they scoop all this stuff in front of your driveway, and you have to get out there and get rid of it, and they giggle as they go by. They just giggle, ha, sucker. Sometimes they come by twice.
Yeah, they did last week too. They came by twice, and the first time they came by, they left a great big pile, and I managed to get that done. And then because the pile was about 2 feet high, 3 feet high, and
I'd get buried in it.
And well, not 3 feet; it was about 2 feet high. And the second time they came through, I didn't use a snowblower; I just used a shovel. But it was just a small pile, but still, it was annoying.
Yeah.
And the thing is if that stuff freezes, then it becomes solid ice, and then you have this great big bump at the end of your driveway.
So anyways, trials and tribulations of winter with that. Okay, so just some announcements then. Sewing with Stephanie and Stephen is always on Wednesdays, 9 a.m. Eastern Time startup. All are welcome. Come and go as you please. At it. Work on whatever you want to work on. And yeah, so you know the routine with that. And then advance warning as well. Well, warning, announce advance notice would be better. Pop-up sew day, Saturday, March the 8th. So that's coming up. Not for a bit, 2 weeks. But All details will be out the week before about that. Okay, so that takes us to our tote bag we're making. Last week we talked about our fabric and thread choices, went through the very thick instructions as well, and looked at any pitfalls or what things you don't really need that companies try to sell you and all that kind of stuff. So in the past week, we have both sewn out our center panel. Now you'll need two of these, one for the front, one for the back. And I showed you my color scheme last week, and it was very bright and bold. Well, I decided not to do that. I changed my color scheme, and I had a fat quarter bundle of sort of reminiscent 1930s style fabrics, and that's why I've decided to do my bag in. And I think it's a little bit more elegant than what I had originally picked. The other bag was more a clown bag. This one is, I think, a little more subdued.
It's got more an old lady bag, right?
Okay, you said it, I didn't, but yeah. Yeah, it is kind of. So, but Walter's doing a different scheme. What is yours?
Yeah, well, I didn't use all the fabrics either. I sort of ended up focusing on blues and teals, so I ended up with this. The only thing is I debated. I put in the center here, instead of the gray, I put a light gray, and it almost looks white. So I don't know if it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Did you use two different colors in your threads? It's like for your satin stitches? Because you've got a dark.
Yeah, I've got different colors. I have different colored grays, and I've got a dark blue, and I've got teal.
I've got. See, I didn't. I used exactly the same, and I'll tell you why I used exactly the same. I found a color that I thought would go with all of the fabrics, and it does. But it makes it longer to create, because you have to switch thread and for each one. And
yeah,
whatnot.
It does. Yeah.
And also, since I'm making two of these panels plus two left panels and two right panels, and I'm using the same fabrics in those, I wanted some consistency, and it would be too easy to get mixed up on the colors, I thought. Well, for me, it would be too easy.
Yeah, well.
So hold yours back up. Whose do you like? Now, Walter hasn't trimmed his yet.
No.
Around, so it doesn't look like this. So whose do we like better? Now, one thing. Oh, you got real fancy, didn't you? Or did you? No, maybe not. What? I guess, well, down. Oh, no, that's just the fabric coming up. I thought you'd used a different, like two different colors in the quilting on that, but no. But actually, I kind of like to see if you compare that to mine. Your quilting on that particular piece shows up better than mine does. Mine's there, but
I tried using really contrasting colors.
I used a really light.
The only thing is the one in the middle here. This one didn't come out very contrasty, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Mine are more subtle, and of course the camera's not really picking these up as well as it could. But
yeah, mine is contrasty, so it's got you see all the quilting on it.
But that's the thing about these In the Hoop projects. They will show you their version of it, and with this is a design. No, this was a Sweet Pea. Sweet Pea will often show pictures of what other people have done, their color schemes and that, to give you some idea of the variety. But really, it's up to you how you want to do it. You can customize it. Last week we showed you one that came from one of my subscribers, Nancy, and she did it in black and white kind of a thing, and it gave it a very elegant look. So you can get a different look with the same pattern, all depending on what you picked for your fabrics and what floats your boat with that. So I mean, it's once you've done one of these, I know what Nancy's doing is she's making a whole bunch of them. She's going to give them as gifts at Christmas time, I think, to her family. So, I mean, you could give everybody the same bag design, but they could all look very different.
Yeah, the only problem with that, people might start fighting. I like that color better.
Well, that's just the fun of the holidays, isn't it? When family go at each other's throats.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's where we're at right now. So I'm going to insert, I made a video showing you the whole process of doing this. And once you've seen this process for the center, all the other pieces that go into this bag, there is a total of 6, 2 center pieces. This is a centerpiece, 2 left side pieces, 2 right side pieces for a total of 6. They're all done the same way. And you don't necessarily have to match your fabrics exactly on the edges, because when you sew them together, there are no seams to match up in terms of design. There are seams to match up, as you'll find when we get to that stage of it. But what I mean is, because for here, for example, I use this light fabric, then you would think the piece that's coming over here, it's a continuation of it in the light. It isn't. It isn't at all. It's different. So I did I've already, spoiler alert, but I'm not showing you this week, I've already done the side pieces. And when next week, after we talk about that, I'll show you what I did with the fabric in that. Maybe Walter will too. Maybe he won't. Depends on how busy he gets with all of this stuff. Or if we have another snowstorm, then he won't be doing this. Okay, so I'm going to insert the video that I made showing you all this. I did it fast forward. It takes a while. I think on the machine it says it's going to take 110 minutes or something like that. It takes a good 2 hours or more with this to do it, because they don't take into consideration the fact that you have to change thread colors at times, and you have to applique the fabric. You have to trim it before you go on to the next stage. What are you staring at?
I was going to ask you about, okay, you did the red. Was that the first line that it did?
Yes.
Okay, see, I didn't do that right.
Oh, okay. We'll talk about the red line when we come to sewing it together, because this was actually a suggestion made by one of our
See, I thought with like the last project we did, it was
at the last line.
Yeah.
I know.
So, okay.
So actually, in terms of full transparency, this red line on this one, I did after the fact, because I thought that was going to happen too. Because the last one, it was the last one that went around. Well, on this one, it's the very first one. So no big deal. I just went right after I finished the whole thing.
That's too bad. I just took mine out of the hoop. I could have done that.
Yeah, because you could just go back to the first one and then.
Oh wow, it's no big deal.
Yeah, well, you'll still be.
I still can see it, so it's just.
We're doing it for convenience sake, on this, and it was a tip from a subscriber. But we'll talk more about why we did that when we come to sewing it together, because right now it doesn't matter. With it. Okay, I'm going to insert the video here, and then we're going to come back and we're going to give some tips and tricks. Talk about something that is very common. It's a kind of a mistake, but you can recover from it, but everybody does it, and we'll talk about that when we come back. I'm going to show you how you stitch out the pieces for this particular bag, the Quilted Patchwork bag by Sweet Pea Designs, and the link for this is in the show notes below. The other day, in the first part of our series, Walter and I showed you the fabrics that we had picked out for this, and these were the ones that I had picked out. This is the centerpiece made already, but I'm not happy with it. There's something about it that's just not doing it for me. So in this, I'm going to change my fabrics. And these are the fabrics and threads I'm going to use. And I've picked some reproductions of the 1930s fabric sort of style. I don't know if these actually are 1930s or not. It doesn't really matter. It's got a more traditional feel to it. And I think it might make a more elegant type of bag. At least that's my theory. And these are the threads I'm probably going to use for the satin stitching. Now, I say probably. I won't make a final decision until I start actually doing it. So let's get started. I have already hooped up in my largest hoop my no-show mesh stabilizer, as you can see here, and I'm using 2 layers of it just for extra security, and that is hooped. Then I'm going to float my battleizer, which is batting. You could use ordinary batting, as we said last week, or I prefer battleizer because it's low loft and a little bit denser. Gives a bit more stability to the bag, and also it lays flatter. So that's what I'm using. It's all hooped up. And then I've got my embroidery machine. I've loaded the file, and let me just show you. Here's the file. This is for the center panel. We need two of these. I'll only be making one of them, so you'll get the idea today of how these work, because basically all the panels work the same way. But some statistics here. I'm using my largest hoop. Now I'm on a Janome 550E, as you know. So I'm using the largest hoop, which is the RE36B, which is approximately 8 inches by 14 inches in size. This is going to make the 7 by 12, I believe they call it in the instructions, bag. I've got it set. It says there's 44 color changes in this. That's counting everything. So it's substantial, and it's going to take about 104 minutes. So that's just under an hour and a half. It's more likely going to take me about 2 hours when you count in the trimming of the fabric and then the thread color changes as well. There is a total of 39,392 stitches. That's a lot, and that's why I doubled the stabilizer. And as I said, my colors of my threads and my fabrics are all up to me. And I'm just going to click this button so I just see what is immediately going to be stitched out without seeing the whole pattern. Now the first thing is it's going to stitch out the tack down line for the batting, the battleizer. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to take it out of the machine, but I'm not going to take it out of the hoop, and I'm going to trim right up next to that tack down stitch using my applique scissors, and I'll show you how that works, all the way around that. So I have loaded white thread into my needle, and I have my, as I said before, my battleizer on top of my no-show mesh. And now I'm going to stitch out the tack down placement line. It's a combination of both, all the way around here so that I can trim my battleizer out. So here we go. Now, my bobbin thread is white. It's a pre-wound bobbin. That's what I use all the time. And I'm not going to change the color of this until maybe near the end. I may come back to this stitch when everything's in there, change the bobbin out for a different color, so I'll see it later when I have to sew the panels together. But I'm using white right now for a vast majority of the initial fabric laydown, because it's going to get covered up in the satin stitch anyways, so there's no sense switching colors back and forth. That's just added steps, takes more time, and I don't need that. You want to make sure that your batting is smooth, no wrinkles in it, and I just take my hand and very carefully just sort of tug it over to the edges when it's doing this to make sure that it is laying flat. Watch your fingers. You do not want to sew a finger into your bag. So this is just about finished here. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my applique scissors, and I showed these in the first video, and I'm going to trim. And I'm going to show you how you do that. Let this just finish off here. Now I do need to take my hoop off the machine, but I am not taking the hoop apart. And I'm going to turn the camera so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, here we are. It's a little awkward when you're on camera to show this, but I have my stitching line all the way around here, and what I want to do is cut away the battleizer and as close to that line as I can get, that stitching line. And that's why these scissors, the duckbill applique scissors, are my favorite for this. You use what works best for you. Just get it started here, and away I go. Now I'm tugging very lightly on the battleizer as I do this, because this puts it closer to the stitch line and makes a nice clean cut. We're going to go all the way around. I hope I'm still in the video. This part of the applique process I kind of enjoy. I don't know why, but cutting away the fabric, there's something about it that, well, it's so easy. It's really so easy doing it this way. And these scissors are designed with the duckbill kind of piece to it, the bigger piece, so you don't cut into your stitches. Okay, I've got that. Now I'm going to put it back on the machine. Let's just turn you around so you can see that. There we go. Put the hoop in. And now it's going to rented lips. It's going to stitch out a little piece right here where my first piece of fabric is going to go. I'm leaving the white thread in, as I said before. So that's my placement line. And now I'm going to get one of my fabrics. I'm going to cut a piece that's big enough to go out right up to the edges here and cover this whole line. So I'll be back with that in a second. So I've got my piece of fabric here, and I'm just going to slide it underneath the raised presser foot, and I'm putting it up close to the top edge of the hoop and the side because we want to leave excess for the pieces that come closest there in the seam, because later we're going to be trimming this out and we want to have enough there to trim out, and you'll understand that when we get to the trimming out part. So I've got that in. I'm still using my white thread, and now we put the tack down line on. So that's done. I'll take out my hoop, again being careful not to separate the two hoop pieces. And I'll turn you around and I'm going to show you. I'm going to trim this. You might be able to see this a little better because there's a bigger contrast here than there was on the white thread on the white batting. Now I want to leave this and this top piece in. So I want to cut this and this out. So I'm just going to take a cut in. And again, I'm just tugging very lightly on my fabric. Makes it a little easier to cut. Now, I want to leave, this is where I go wrong sometimes because there's a curve. I want to leave some out here. So basically, I'm just going to go and cut that piece off just like that. Now, you're going to say, well, that looks like a waste. Well, it is, but you need to have at least a ½ inch of fabric outside of those lines, because on the outside of the line that was put down for the batting. Again, this will make sense when I show you how to trim this whole piece up when it's done. Okay, so I have my first piece there. We're going to return it to the machine. And now it's going to put down a placement line for the second piece of fabric. Oops, forgot to put down my foot. And so now I'm going to lay down my next piece of fabric. Now, the instructions do tell you approximately how big to cut each one of your pieces of fabric. I just basically eyeball it. I'm making sure I have enough out in this seam allowance and enough up here when I trim it around. Pull that up a little closer. and away we go. Now it's a good idea to press your fabrics as well, especially if you're using fat quarters. You're going to have lines in it, crease lines in it. So do that before you lay it down. Okay, so again, same thing. I'm taking the hoop out of the machine. And I'm going to trim this fabric. Again, I'm going to leave a big chunk here in the seam, and I'm going to leave a bigger chunk up here from the curve of the bag. But I'm going to trim this over to there, and I'm going to trim this up to there. So just get this in position so I can cut it. This looks like it may be difficult to see on camera too because it's very light. For the sake of the video, I maybe should have used black thread. Okay, that piece is off. And I'm just trying, I turn the hoop around to make it easier for me. It's really whatever works the best way for you for comfort. I like to have my duckbill against the stitch line. And that's why I'm turning the hoop. Now I'll come up here and I'm just going to go off. And there we are. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to return it to the hoop and I'm going to carry on. It's going to put down a placement line for the next piece of fabric. Then I'm going to put the fabric on it, and then it's going to do the tack down line, and then I'm going to take it out of the hoop, or off the machine, not out of the hoop, off the machine. I'm going to trim it with my applique scissors, then put it back. And I'm going to continue doing that until I have all the pieces here. So I don't think you want to really watch that, but what I will do is I'll record a little bit of it in bits and pieces, do stops and starts and speed it up, just so you get a sense of the whole process. Okay, so all of my pieces of fabric are now in place. Don't worry about the fact that this looks like a mess, because it does look like a mess, but this is all going to get trimmed away and you'll see the shape of the center panel of the bag once that happens. But right now, the machine wants to do the quilting in each one of these sections, and each one of these sections has a different quilting pattern. Now, I have a couple of decisions to make here. First decision is, do I want to use a different color of thread in each piece for the quilting? Or do I want to go with something that I think will be somewhat neutral, but show up on each of these fabrics? And that means I will have less thread changes to make. What I've decided to do is use a very medium beigey brownish kind of thread color, and I'm going to use the same one in all of these blocks. But it does mean the machine is going to stop and look for a thread change, but that's okay. I can just restart it back up. So I'll show you what the first one is going to look like, and it's going to do it right up here into this piece. Now I'm going to stop the machine for just a second because I want to trim this thread tail away. Make sure I get the right one. That would be, I think I got the wrong one. I do. Because I don't want that to overlap in the rest. Now you notice I pulled out too much of the thread, so I'll just pull it back up through the needle. That's not a problem. And just make sure it's still threaded properly and not getting in the way of anything else. And there we are. And let's continue. So you can see in this particular pattern design, the quilting is very intricate in each one of these parts. And as I said, if you wanted to change your thread color for each one of these, you can do that. I'm going to take a chance on this, and I'm going to use the same color of thread in all of the panels, but I have picked a color that I think will show up nicely in each one. We shall see. Now this is the part of the bag that's going to take, or for this panel anyways, is going to take the longest, because it says on my machine there are still 92 minutes to go. So yes, this is a project you've got to be patient with. The end result will be worth it, but if you're trying to make this the night before to give to somebody as a hostess gift or as a birthday present or something, no, you cannot do it the night before. It is going to take you, the total bag is going to take you several sessions, several days probably, to do. Because remember, this is only one of 6 panels that we have to make. Then we have to sew it all together, and then we have to make the lining, make the handles. So this is not a process that is going to make a quick and dirty little bag. But as I said, it's going to be worth the time. Okay, the machine is finished working in that block. It's going to go over to the next block. This would be when, if you wanted to change your color, you could. I'm not. I'm just going to stick with the color I already have here. And this one is a different design than the one above. And I'll just let it do a little bit of this to start with, and then we'll do a little bit of a fast forward so you can see it near the end of this part of the bag, which I said is going to take quite a while. You don't want to be sitting here for an hour and a half watching this. And then we'll do the satin stitching. So I'll just let this get into some of the design. And the stitches have been designed, I've noticed in this particular pattern, to look almost like it's been hand quilted. The stitching is not absolutely precise, and that's been done on purpose, I'm sure, to give it that homemade look. Okay, so now it's starting off with some more of the design, as you can see here. And I'll just let it continue, and I'll fast forward, and we'll come back when we get down to the very last block that it's going to stitch out. Okay, so all the quilting is done and now it's time for the satin stitch. Now this is where you have some more decisions you can make. You can do the satin stitches, which are going to go across all the joins of all the fabric that is here. And you can do them in various different colors that coordinate with your fabrics. That means you're going to have more thread changing, more color changes. But I've decided I'm going to use one color for this, and I have picked a kind of a browny, dark beigey kind of color, which I think will go with all of the other fabrics that are here, and possibly even give it a little bit of a vintage look, because I think that's what I'm going for right now with this. So let's start this up. And what it does first is it basically does a, oh, I was going to say it does a zigzag, but it doesn't, because these are different decorative sashing stitches as well on each thing, which gives it a nice variety. But yeah, I think that color is going to work pretty well. It almost has sort of a bronzy tone to it, but I think it'll fit with the rest of the fabrics. So I'm going to let this play out for a while. I'm going to speed this up and bring you back to when we just come to the ending of this and the finishing up. And I'm going to do something a little different than I have done before based on what was made as a suggestion on the Kindred Creatures wall hanging from one of my subscribers. So we'll let this play out for a bit and then we'll be back. Okay, so I've taken this out of the hoop, and what I'm going to show you now is how you trim it up. But if we look at the back of it first, you'll notice there's a red line all the way around the perimeter. And I went back to the very first stitch position and dropped a red bobbin in my bobbin holder and had it stitch out that line again. This will make it easier when it comes time for putting the panels together, and you'll understand that when we get to the actual sewing of the panels together for the bag. So we're going to flip it back over here, and I'm going to take it out of the hoop, and we'll just get this hoop out of our way. And then we're going to lay it out on our cutting mat, and I'm going to grab my trimmer by George, and I'll show you how this works. It's a specialty ruler. It's called Trimmer by George 2.0. I do believe they have it now with 3.0, which is a little narrower, but it's all marked just like a regular quilting ruler is marked. But if you flip it over, you can take a look at the edge here, and it'll show you, if you will take a closer look, and you can see there's a ridge. And that ridge is meant to butt up against your fabric along the stitch line, and then you can cut off your stabilizer. So I'm going to put it under here, just like so. Get it lined up, and you can see it protects your fabric, and then you just cut with your rotary cutter. And off comes your stabilizer, but it leaves the fabric behind. And so I'm going to do this on both edges, the short edges first, just to shorten it up a little bit. And then I'm going to turn it and do it under the longer edges. And it makes a very neat job of cutting away the stabilizer, because you really don't want that stabilizer in your, or that much of it hanging over, because it makes it very difficult to sew together. So we're doing the last edge right here. And it also protects it so that you don't accidentally cut into your fabric. Now you could just use an ordinary ruler for this and line it up, but you have the danger of cutting into your fabric. So now I'm going to take that outside line that goes all the way around the perimeter of the center piece, and on my ruler I've put a piece of masking tape on the 1/2 inch line just so I can see it a little better, and I've marked on that masking tape 1/2 inch. And so I want a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to line up the edge of the masking tape along that outside stitched line, and then I'm just going to cut it. Now if I start with the shorter end first, it'll be a little easier for cutting, I think. So I've got that lined up, and then I just cut off the excess fabric, and now I have enough for my seam allowance of 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to take it and do it to the other side as well. And this of course neatens everything up. And then we're going to do the last two edges. Now, as I said, the piece I'm cutting off leaves a 1/2 inch beyond that stitch line. And later, when we sew all the pieces together, you'll see why that's important when we line them up to sew them on our domestic sewing machine. So we'll just get that cut off, making sure it's straight. And now there's one spot left, and I can't use the by George ruler for this, and that's that curve on the inside of the bag, or where the handles are going to go. So I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm just going to eyeball it and cut around close to 1/2 inch all the way around. If it's not exact, it doesn't matter. It'll get buried into the seam allowance, but you don't want it to be any less than 1/4 inch, and ideally you want it as close to 1/2 inch as you can possibly get it. And so there we go. We're all trimmed up. So here's our final piece. This is the center of the bag. There's going to be a left piece and a right piece on here, and then we've got to duplicate all those. So there's going to be 2 center, 2 right, 2 left. And we'll be using the same fabrics and the same thread colors. And I think I do prefer this color over, or these fabric choices over what I did originally, which was the brighter colors. I think this has a little bit more of a vintage look to it. So that's all there is to stitching this out. In our next part of the series, we'll show you what the other pieces look like when they're done, but you stitch them out in exactly the same way as we did this piece. And then we'll talk about creating the bottom of the bag, the lining of the bag, and getting the bag all together. Actually, before we do that, we'll talk about stitching these panels together. And then you'll see why that red thread underneath is important. Okay, so I hope that made the process clear for you, how you go about doing this. And tips and tricks. Okay, one of the most common mistakes that experienced and inexperienced doers of these kind of things make, I mean, I still do it every now and then, is because it gets tricky. You have to leave, and the instructions tell you to leave fabric in the seams while you're putting the other pieces together. So for example, this piece that you see right here, okay, when you first lay down the fabric to cover the placement stitch, and then it tacks down the fabric, you trim the fabric away. This is before you're doing, as you saw in the video, before you do the satin stitches or anything like that. But it says in the instructions to leave excess fabric out in the seams. And so what they consider is out here is a seam, up here is a seam. But when I was cutting out a piece of it, or it could, I forgot about the curve, and I just followed the curve line. I think that's what you did.
Well, no, actually, I because I didn't really look at instructions
Oh, well,
carefully.
there you go.
So what happened is normally when I did applique, I'd cut all the way around the applique, right?
Yeah, because
So
you
I cut all the
normally
way around the applique, and then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to have leftover at the top.
So
So I didn't have any leftover at the top, especially like here, I cut all the way around the applique. So I didn't have any left over here, and I didn't have any at the top. But I realized it pretty quick after the first two pieces, right?
now there's a way to recover from that. How did you recover from it?
What I did was I redid these, and so there's a double layer of fabric here.
So that's one way to recover from it. And don't be afraid to, you don't need to scrap your project. You just back up the machine to where that it starts that the tack down stitch, lay a new piece of fabric over that placement line, and then just restitch it. It's not going to add any bulk to your project, and your needle will easily go through several layers of fabric, not a problem. And then you can correct it. Or what I've done in the past too, if it's one little spot where I've left it off, well, if I haven't cut my stabilizer yet, like this white stuff's a stabilizer, then you can treat it like fabric. So for example, I can't really show you, well, maybe I can't see. Okay, let's say that I cut that too close, and that what you see the white is my stabilizer. So I'd leave the stabilizer. Normally I would clip that out at the same time, but not in this case. I would just leave it, and also when it comes to sewing the pieces together, that acts as a piece of fabric, so I'll still get my seam allowance. And because this is a woven stabilizers that we're using, no show mesh, you don't have to worry about it falling apart doing that. Also, it's a very minimal amount that you'll be using in there because you're going to be sewing the seams in 1/4 of an inch from that. So you don't have to panic if that happens to you. Just don't do it too often. With it. Try to remember. But it gets tricky when you have something like this. If it's straight around, there's no problem. But when you get going on it, you don't think about this part, a curved part in there. Okay, so that's one little tip for you. It's not a panic situation. Okay, being consistent in your fabric placements. What I mean by that is, since this has, for the front and the back, each one consists of 3 panels, you might want to figure out where your fabric is going to go in relation to the center panel. Now, because this is patchwork, and I said earlier, these don't really match up with each other, like one piece isn't continuous right across to the next, it wouldn't really matter. But don't start changing your fabrics drastically, because it's going to look, you want to make it look like it's all one piece, that it's seamless. If you start, like say you had 20 different fabrics and you wanted to use them all, well, this part only takes 11. So you decide to use a whole other bunch of fabrics for the other panels. Well, you could get an interesting effect depending on what those colors are and how they go together. But you can also get lost in the process. It might make what you're making even more complicated. So you have to decide for yourself, is it worth it to do that kind of thing? And what was another thing? So if though, for example, you're sewing away and you did decide you want to have your fabrics in a particular spots and you sewed the wrong fabric, just do what we said a moment ago. Just take the right fabric. Don't throw out your project. Lay the new fabric over top of the piece that was wrong. Do the tack down stitch again, trim it, way you go. You're fine. You don't have to worry about that. Same with threads. Let's say you want it to do a certain color thread along one of these patchwork lines and you got screwed up, or you didn't like it. You started sewing it out and you didn't like the way it looked.
Well, actually, I did that with this piece down here. I put a lighter thread in it, and I didn't like that there was enough contrast or not.
Are you talking about the quilting part?
The quilting part, yeah. Right? And after it quilted out, I looked at it and I said, I don't really like that. So I ended up redoing it with a darker thread.
But you didn't rip out the stitches that were there.
No,
you don't have to.
You might be able to see if you look real carefully, but I don't see it.
Usually it's pretty accurate. It'll just go right over top of what is there without any problem at all. So you don't have to start from scratch again. You can recover from it, and it's not difficult to do. Okay, did I have any other tips for you? No. Any tips you've got?
Nope.
We are using 2 layers of no-show mesh stabilizer. If you want your bag to have more stability, I mean, this is pretty good. When you get all the stitches in this and that, you know, it's like this is.
Well, that's not just no-show mesh. You're using battleizer too, aren't you?
Oh yeah, there's battleizer in this as well, but the pattern calls for batting, or was in our case we use battleizer, which is same diff. But if you want a really stiff bag, okay, you can. Now they do recommend, it's optional in Sweet Pea. If it was an OESD, they would tell you to do this. They suggest a fusible interfacing, like a Pellon of some sort of, like SF101 or something like that, with it.
I've done other bags before. I think this would be is thick enough.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that the SF101 really does anything
Actually,
more for this.
Well, I don't know if it would do any more for this. It does do it if you're. It does make a difference if you're using just quilting cotton.
Well, yeah, and if you were just doing 1 layer.
Yeah.
Like, but we have battleizer in this as well. But if you want a stiffer bag, you can use it. Or you can use, since it's a bag and it's probably never going to see a washing machine, you could use a tearaway stabilizer, which is more like a heavy kind of paper, fibrous paper kind of a deal. That will give you a little bit more stiffness. I wouldn't recommend using something like Soft and Stable in the sides of the bag, because when you have to sew the seams together, your seams are going to be way too thick. Now you could cut away, if you want to spend the time, you could cut away some of that Soft and Stable, cut it up to the stitch line, and then you wouldn't have it in the seams. But why? Why? Now, when it comes to the bottom of the bag, we may or may not be using a stabilizer like Soft and Stable, because we bought leather, full leather, for the bag bottoms, and we haven't worked with leather yet. So that's going to be a little bit of an experiment with this. So we may not need to really. I like a stiff bottom, so in my bags. Okay, this is getting dirty. All right. No other tips? No. Okay, so next week we're going to show you how to do the side pieces, and I've already made a little video for that. It'll be much shorter than the centerpiece because they are smaller pieces, and also it's just really a repeat of what we've already shown, so I didn't feel that I needed to go into a lot of detail with that video because it's the same procedure. And we'll probably do the assembly of the top of the bag, which means putting these pieces all together, and then we'll explain the red line in here at the same time for matching it up. And these pieces will probably be easier to match up when we put it together than if you saw Kindred Creatures, the wall hanging, when we were putting that together. There were more pieces of it, and there were a lot of overlapping sashing with that. So that was a little bit trickier. This is a little bit more straightforward. But there's many miles to go yet with this bag, because once we get the side pieces on for the front and the back, then we have to work on the bottom. We need to work on handles, and we need to work on lining as well. No, the lining and the handles and the bottom are not done in the hoop. And someone asked me the other day whether or not you could get a pattern that made a tote bag in the hoop that also did the lining. No, I have looked, and I have not, across all of the ones, I have never seen that. And the reason probably is the lining is basically sewing up a couple of pieces of fabric, you know, straight up. So yeah, there would be no advantage to using an embroidery machine for that. So just before we conclude, a couple of comments from the last video. Someone mentioned that somebody else had written a comment. I wasn't completely clear on what they were asking. But this person said maybe she's wondering if you could make the project on an ordinary sewing machine. And I thought about this. You could. This particular one, you could. Because what you would do is make your own fabric. All this is fabric. It's patchwork. So, and it's like a crazy quilt. If you know what a crazy quilt is, it's where you take odd pieces of fabric, butt them up against each other, and to hold them together, you use the decorative stitches on your sewing machine, which is what these are. So, yeah, you would make, I would make the entire, I wouldn't even do panels. I would take a big chunk of fabric, of like a muslin or a plain print, a plain solid fabric, and I would sew down at random pieces to look like the patchwork, and then I would trim them up a little bit and go in with my decorative stitches and go over the seams of each of those.
And basically it's like free motion quilting.
Yeah.
In each of the little squares here that in different patterns and stuff like that. I mean, if you are good at free motion quilting, it might be good.
Yeah.
Practice.
With practice on it.
Yeah. And then you have to, here you're basically going over the edges with satin stitches.
Yeah. Which your sewing machine can do.
But I would think that it would be a difficult project to do.
Well, I think it would be very time consuming.
Yeah.
Much more so than something like this, like on that machine.
But I mean, the one nice thing about the embroidery machine is that it does all this stuff for you. So
yeah, I mean, if you've got a long arm, you could actually do like get a cheater cloth, one that looks like it's got quilt squares on it or something like that. You can buy those, put it on your long arm, a big piece of it, have the long arm do all the quilting on it. You'd of course have your you'd have like a layer, you'd make the sandwich out of it, and I have done this, and it makes a fairly substantial bag because you've got a layer of batting, you've got backing fabric, you've got your quilting fabric on top, you're covering it all with, and if you do the quilting fairly densely, it's nice and stiff when you're done. And then you can choose whether or not you want to put a lining in that bag as well. So it can be done too, especially if you want to mass produce them. But anyways, yeah, the answer to the question is it could be done on your domestic sewing machine. It's going to take you a lot more time. And there's some skill involved with it as well, especially when it comes to the quilting part of it. Another one said, and this one has nothing to do with the bags, but Carl Sass, 4500, he says, Stephen, I love the cat shirt. Where did you find it? Well, I did write back to him and said, well, Walter made it. But we've had this question before, but we'll go over it again. Where do you get the fabric like this? Where do you get the fabric like this?
I got it from Spoonflower.
What kind of fabric is it?
Cotton. Quilting cotton.
It's quilting cotton. What kind of fabric is that? Is
quilting cotton.
Is it batik?
No, it's not batik. I've done batik too. But, yeah, I just use quilting cotton. Everybody says, where do you get the patterned fabric? Because a lot of stuff, if you buy shirting fabric, actually what they call shirting fabric, it's usually a combination of polyester and cotton, and or it can be a pure cotton, but it's a different type, right? And but the patterns are all lousy. They're all like checks and stripes, and there's nothing like fancy. It's really hard to find something with men's fabric for shirts is boring. It's really hard to find fabric that has nice patterns to it. So I started, when I first started making shirts, they suggested using quilting cotton, and I started, actually my first shirt was a batik, right? The only problem I don't like about batiks is that they tend to be a little stiffer when you wash them. They're not quite as nice to wear, I don't find. But just plain old quilting cotton, it actually washes fairly well. We've only really had one shirt that doesn't really wash very well, but it's nice to sew with. It's easy to get, and we don't iron them. Yeah, and a lot of the women say, "Oh, well, I have to iron it all the time." Yeah. No, I don't usually iron mine. I might, if I do iron it, I might iron the collar, but that's about it. But yeah,
as you see right now, these ones, they have not been ironed, and these shirts have been washed many, many times, and they have not faded. Like Walter said, I have one shirt he made me, and for some reason, that one has faded. And it faded fairly quickly. But none of the other shirts, and I've got about 15 of them, have ever had a problem with washing them. So yeah, quilting cotton. Get it. And you can have the most unique shirts of anybody out there. Say, maybe we could do make patchwork fabric and then make a shirt out of that. I've thought about it. But anyways, okay, so I think that's it for us today. So tune in next week for our next part in the series, and we hope you're enjoying this and hope you're getting something out of it. And if you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below or send them directly to me via email. Your choice. Okay, say goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.